Well, thanks very much to the organizers for inviting me to participate in this. It's been a wonderful day and very interesting. And as usual, I've gotten much more out of what I expect to give to this forum. Today, what I'd like to talk about is how technology can be used to improve the way that we assess and collect information from patients about their experience. And so I want to clarify that I'm not going to be talking about telemedicine or telehealth per se. That's already been covered in a very nice report issued by the IOM in the not too distant past, but focus more on some of the patient-related outcomes that have come up earlier in some of these sessions. So to address, is it this? Oops. I know. It said it's not responding. Do you guys need to fix it? I didn't do anything, I promise. Excellent. Okay, great. So I'm going to begin by answering some of the questions that were posed in the session, one of which is how can distance medicine technology be used to collect evidence to inform cancer care? I'll talk a little bit about some of the evidence and then talk about some of the challenges and then wrap up with some of the policy issues. So distance medicine technology can be used to effectively engage patients outside of traditional settings. And so we're talking about ways to reach out to patients beyond the traditional clinic settings using distance devices such as electronic devices, sensors, et cetera. These can also be used to increase efficiency in clinical trials as a result, since they can be administered and accomplished via distance, but they also offer some new methods and new types of data collection that we presently don't always take advantage of in clinical trials. These methods can also be used to monitor treatment adherence, symptoms, side effects, issues that we'd heard a lot about today, focusing on patient-reported outcomes as well as current health states. And they can generate data that typically aren't collected in the course of our research, but they can identify trends that are very relevant to prevention and survivorship. And these include things like behavioral outcomes such as tobacco use, physical activity, and diet, but also in providing information about environment to inform gene-environment interaction studies and such. And they also play a role, even though this is not focused on telehealth, these technologies can play a role in telehealth as well as inform CER and rapid learning systems. So a lot of what we're talking about are some of the new technologies that include a lot of sensor-based technologies, things that are already in existence like patient portals that we've heard something about, using phones for both collection as well as distribution of data and information. And a lot of these devices have been proliferating over a number of years, and over the next couple of years, it's expected that their marketing of some devices is going to increase by almost fourfold. So these are used by both medical providers as well as consumers, and there's multiple uses for health, including early detection, continuous monitoring, adherence, measuring fitness, rehabilitation, and such. And some of these can be wearable, some of them are portable but not wearable, and some of them can be installed into what we call smart homes. So some of the data, there's much of the data supporting the use of this technology exists in cardiovascular and pulmonary disease, but there is some data to support the use of this technology in cancer care, and it's encouraging. So this is a study of an intervention called Support Screen, which is the use of a touch screen to identify patient distress outcomes via an automated system. And so patients inputted information about their pain, distress and depression, and they receive tailored information on how to respond to this information, as well as a specific recommendation from the specific care provider, depending on what the threshold level of the outcome was. So if it was severe pain, they received a referral to see the MD, et cetera, et cetera. Another system called STAR, it was an online platform for patient-reported outcomes and was tested in lung cancer patients who were fairly ill using standard toxicity monitoring criteria, and this was well accepted by patients. In the online version, I believe almost all the patients logged on and used it from outside of the clinic setting. And patients really viewed this as having added value as part of their visit, as did the providers. And the providers also used the information that patients reported about their symptoms to actually alter recommendations for patient management. And so while these data did not provide additional information about the actual outcomes of the patients, they did add complementary data on what the patients were experiencing on a day-to-day basis, which is very important for patients' quality of life and their own coping with their care. This is a study that our team had conducted in collaboration with the California Institute of Technology and Telecommunication at UC San Diego and University of Alabama, Birmingham, where we established a home-based sensor technology network that was combined with a novel cyber infrastructure to assess several patient-related outcomes related to cancer treatment and care and prevention. And this particular example focuses on the use of this for early identification of dehydration risk in patients who are undergoing radiation treatment for head and neck cancers. And using this system, patients, we identified 60% of patients who had at least one event that was medically actionable that indicated that they were at possible risk for experiencing dehydration. We also captured data on patient-reported outcomes, and findings related to nausea, vomiting, swallowing also correlated with the dehydration events as well. So that, I think, helped to validate some of the findings that we found with the sensors. Importantly, and consistent with some of the other findings, this was very acceptable to both patients and clinicians, and they rated it fairly easy to use. We had a very high retention rate of patients throughout this study, and this, again, did alter management of these patients. This is just a framework for PsyCore, which I'm not going to go into now because of time, but I want to just point out that one feature of this was the involvement of multiple stakeholders in the development of this and the inclusion of a number of their outcomes and needs in this, including the patients. And I think that was one of the key aspects of this project. And so finally, in a system that used an interactive voice response system for patients who had undergone surgery for lung cancer, patients who are randomized to the interactive voice response, plus clinician email notification if symptoms reached a threshold level, actually did better in terms of experiencing a decrease and more rapid decline in their symptom threshold events. And again, clinician as well as patient satisfaction was very high in this study. So some of the challenges and opportunities, despite some of these successes that we've seen and some of the encouragement, there remain a number of challenges, but also opportunities for implementing these kinds of systems and technologies in cancer care. As we've heard before, an IT infrastructure is very critical to capture the data that we need throughout the cancer continuum. Many of these systems, particularly those that are commercially available, are available in sort of their own system and therefore are not easily integratable into some other systems such as a cyber infrastructure, EHR, et cetera, et cetera. And we really need approaches that enable adaptive technology for patient-provider reporting and feedback. And we need to also be able to cope, like I said, with some of these proprietary issues that don't lend well to wide applicability and to use with a number of different partnerships. And then data privacy and HIPAA concerns are also an issue as well. There are some barriers to acceptability that we need to consider as well with this technology. One is that there is fairly limited evidence on the clinical utility of these measures and the data. And so how does this really inform the day-to-day patient care? I think we need more studies and more evidence on this. There's also limited guidance on how to really incorporate this and best use these measures in clinical workflow and decision-making and also in clinical trials. And again, I think the need for standard IT-enabled applications would help us to integrate this better into practice. And then there are individual level variables such as differences in culture, language, literacy, technology preferences, and access is a big issue. Despite the fact, the data that we saw earlier today about the widespread availability of cell phones, there still is a significant digital divide in this country and elsewhere. Sustainability is also a key issue, and this relates to funding as well as issues related to reimbursement and incentives for adopting this technology. And the benefits and the outcomes are really to be determined and balanced. We may not, can I have my glass of water, please? Thanks so much. The benefits and the outcomes to be determined from this are really, I think, not well known, and they need to be balanced, I think, with what some of the things that we're not gaining from this might be. And then again, the integration with these technologies with regard to how to integrate them best with the EHR also is a remaining issue. So finally, as I'm running out of time, we need to expand the evidence base for these IT applications, and some of the critical questions to be asked in the research are under what circumstances are these technologies most appropriate, for which patients do they work best, and under what conditions, and how do we evaluate their use and the need to evaluate their use in diverse care settings, and then looking at some of the opportunities and constraints in accelerating their use and implementation, and this is including funding for both basic as well as applied research. A number of people have called for a systems-based approach. This, again, I think it's not just assessment and collection of data, but really collecting data, feeding it back into a system in a way that would enable personalized decision and support for patients. And this includes data on health status, some of the behavioral and psychosocial outcomes that we've all talked about today, and then really making very context-driven and meaningful interpretation of the data with meaningful alerts and feedback prioritization. And so I'll leave you with the 3 policy issues, which are to facilitate the utilization and the evaluation of the distance medicine technologies into oncology practice, and to really emphasize the need to expand the evidence base and to enable the adoption of some of these systems that will really facilitate intake and sharing of the information and eventually, hopefully, promote changes in patients' health behaviors. And then finally, improving access for both providers and patients to distance medicine technologies. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thanks very much. We'll move on now to Learning Healthcare from Lynn Etheridge from the Rapid Learning Project at George Washington University. Lynn?